The devil's on the loose and he's dancing with the money.
Deep from the bowels of the Macabre Theater Laboratory, we bring you Macabre Cast. There is nothing wrong with your streaming service. You are exactly where you should be, where the slush puppy machine is always on and cold. Your favorite horror mag is on the rack, discreetly displayed between Women's Wear Daily and Cosmopolitan. I'm your host, Dark Mark, along with my mold-riddled counterpart, Karis, the Little Mummy, here to bring you the latest episode of Macabre Cast, where we'll be dropping R's where they belong and adding them where they don't. Newbies welcome, regulars welcome back, and worshippers, get out of here. Oh. This is a safe space for those who waited with bated breath for Hollywood to finally release a new Friday the 13th film. Heck, it's only been 17 years, and oh, by the way, it will technically be part 13, so make it count. Keep it simple, go old school, and connect it somehow to the first 5 films. If you haven't already, subscribe and follow to my show on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, or TikTok, and tell a friend to do the same. Even that guy that can't manage to speak without spitting all over the person he's speaking to. Yeah, that guy. If you wish to interact with fellow Monster Kids, or even the Drac Pack Elite, follow the Facebook page, Macabre Theater. It's there where you can send me a voice message and participate in the show. A link can be found in the description of this episode. Macabre Cast, episode 152, and all of its marvelous glory begins now.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Adoro il cast macabro.
Favorite final girl or boy of the Friday the 13th franchise? That's the topic this week, Karis. And I'd like to know why he or she is your favorite.
I'd go with Muffin.
Muffin, the dog from part 2?
She shows up at the end, doesn't she?
I've told you this before, Karis. The ending scenes of the first 5 films are all dreams. They all end with a dream sequence.
Where is the dream sequence at the end of part 4?
That may be the only exception, seeing where Paramount originally intended that film to be the end of their franchise.
Hey, you know what? I don't even care. You know, Doc, I just read a study that found humans eat more bananas than monkeys.
Really? Humans eat more bananas than monkeys? Interesting.
Funny thing is, though, I don't even think I ever even remember eating a monkey.
And on that note, it's time for horror news. The OG Faces of Death is getting a 4K Blu-ray release. Blumhouse plans a reimaging of Blair Witch. Are we really doing that again? Lila and Nora Zuckerman, the showrunners of Poker Face, have signed on to write Scream 8. The Bride released to DVD and Blu-ray on April 7th. And Eli Roth's Vision of Ice Cream Man comes to theaters in August of 2026. And that's it for horror news. And Draven agrees. Draven the blood-vomiting bat. Children of the night, what messes they make. So, favorite final girl or boy of the Friday the 13th franchise, hands down from me, it has and always will be Jenny from Part 2, played by Amy Steele. I still will argue to this day, actual scary-wise, hands down, Part 2 is actually scary. Amy's time to shine was the decade of the 80s and the very beginning of the 90s. The only two standout films after this were April Fool's Day from 1986, which was a one and done, is there a killer, is there not, and Walk Like a Man with Howie Mandel. So unless you want to talk about the 1991 remake of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, what? You didn't know that there was a remake of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? Well, neither did anyone else. Oh. Unfortunately for Amy Steele. And then there was a handful of AT&T commercials.
Oh my gosh. Does that suck?
Anyway, back to my pick. Jenny is helping her former boyfriend Paul start up a counselor training camp while on her summer break from child psychology classes. And that's why she's been my favorite. She's the only one in the film that takes the story of Jason never drowning in the lake and surviving in the wilderness, as she describes him at one point, a frightened retard. Her words, not mine. But I remind you, Monster Kids, the film is from 1982. Anyway, because she has put that together, that the legend is true, she uses that child psychology to fool Jason into thinking that she is his dead mother. Even if only for a minute. Runner-up would be Tommy Jarvis, played by the original actor Corey Feldman. And Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Tommy is more of a sidekick to the final girl, his sister, Trish. But he's only in training because his character would go on to be the final boy in the next two pictures, only played by other actors. But is still Tommy Jarvis. And speaking of Part 4, I had said earlier that there is no dream sequence at the end of that film. And that's true. But, Monster Kids, did you know that there was a dream sequence filmed? Here's a spoiler coming for the final chapter. I'm so sorry that if anyone still hasn't seen this film, it's 42 years old. So, spoilers ahead. After Tommy Jarvis machetes Jason up, he and Trish fall asleep. This is in the dream sequence now. And they wake up to sirens. Tommy goes to the police. Trish noticed water dripping down from upstairs. She goes to investigate and finds her mom dead in the bathtub and begins holding her and crying as we see Jason walk up behind her in a blurry out of focus. The dead mother opens her eyes. They're just completely, the eyeballs are just white as Jason brings down the machete. And then Trish wakes up in the hospital. And then the rest of what we know is the end of the final chapter happens, but they should have kept this. You can see it on YouTube. Just search Friday the 13th Part 4 alternate ending.
You are listening to Doc Mark's Macabre Cast, Episode 152, Favorite Final Girl of the Friday the 13th franchise.
Horror chap Matt knows all about monsters. He said they were coming to get me tonight.
Hey, Doc Mark, Little Karis, and all the Monster Kids hang out at the theater this week. It's Horror Chap Matt checking in. So, Doc, I've been stuck on the 7th ring of hell ever since my miserable performance on The Shining trivia. Oh. And this week, I finally managed to convince a fellow damned soul to lend me a quarter to place a call into the theater. I did attempt to call last week collect, but Karis rejected the charges. So, I just want to give a quick review of a movie that I watched last week. It's called Dolly, and I'm going to give this thing a 7 out of 10. It's a throwback to this 1970s grindhouse type of slasher horror movie about a huge mountain of a woman that's clearly not all there, out in the middle of the woods, who wears a doll's head mask that's actually pretty creepy, and that she goes around and abducts people and tries to raise them as if they are her collection, part of her collection of dolls or their children. And there's some pretty gross out scenes in this thing. It did have some decent practical effects, and like I said, a couple of these shots and scenes actually turned my stomach a little bit, so kudos for them for that. So they're going to get a 7 out of 10. On to this week's topic, favorite final girl from a Friday the 13th movie. And I'm going to start off with an honorable mention, and this is for a duo, a tag team if you would, between Reggie the Reckless and Pam from Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. I just liked how much Pam looked out for Reggie and how they really went at Roy/Jason, especially the chainsaw scene and that stuff. That was some good stuff. And then I'm also going to mention Tommy Jarvis. Yes, I'm going to say that he's a final girl. Things that are working against Tommy for me are the fact that he's in 3 movies. Some people may say that makes him the ultimate final girl, much like Neve Campbell in the Scream movies. But I just felt like with Tommy, as cool of a character he is, I wish he was played by the same actor at least a couple of times. Yeah, I know at the beginning of Part 5 you get young Corey Feldman in there reprising his role before he's recast as an adult. But another thing that goes against Tommy for me is they give you a couple of great cliffhangers. At the end of Part 4, Tommy stares at the camera and you're like, uh-oh, something's going on here after he's taken out Jason. And then especially at the end of Part 5, when he puts the mask on and you think he's going to kill Pam. I was really curious to see where they were going to go with that in Part 6, but of course, probably the right choice. They backed down from that direction and went with him just trying to eradicate Jason's body, and of course, we all know how that turned out. So my favorite final girl of all time is actually going to go to Trish Jarvis, Tommy's oldest sister. I just love how she looks out for her brother, and the scene that really sells me on her being my favorite final girl is, even though she's so terrified and afraid for her life and her brother's life, when Rob's getting killed down in the basement and she runs away, she actually stops and goes back to help out Rob. And actually, I don't know, even though it's a great job acting on her part, like, you're convinced she is terrified, and she goes back down into that basement to face whatever's going on down there. And I think another reason why, other than the fact that Part 4 is my favorite, is the fact that her Jason, who's actually still human at this point, Ted White's Jason is the scariest of the franchise, in my opinion. He's just a force of nature in this thing. The way he moves and the power. I think that plays a role into why I think Trish is my favorite final girl. Although I would say Trish and Tommy are another combo/tag team for my favorite final girl/boy. As always, Stark, make mine Macabrecast.
Horror Chat didn't call here collect. Horror Chat was too busy last week gallivanting with the demons in hell. He wasn't calling collect, and I didn't refuse charges. Nice try, Horror Chat.
Horror Chat, Dolly does truly look terrifying. And I don't know about you, but I definitely get a female Leatherface vibe off of the photos I've seen from the film. Did you see that in the theater? I'm curious if that's up for streaming, because I would really like to see that. And great pick for a final girl. Trish is excellent. And obviously with her final boy in training, Tommy Jarvis, you get a great duo there. And what makes Trish a great final girl is she turns to Jason at one point and says, I'm going to give you something to remember us by. And remember, she machetes his hand. She is a great choice. I absolutely agree. And I'm a fan of Pam and Reggie. Maybe not so much but I can definitely see how they became runners-up. As you know, I love Part 5. I love 1 through 5. I think you have your perfect franchise, perfect set of movies, 1 through 5. It's not that I don't like the other films, and I don't mean to kind of get on Part 6 so much, but there's a little too much tongue-in-cheek for me in Part 6. It almost seems like it's a parody of itself. And back to Part 4 for a minute, Horror Chat. I think that's where you and I always part ways, because I agree. I love Ted White, and I also think he's the best Jason. Better than any of them. But you always seem to slip in that he's still human at this point, that he's still alive. And ever since I first saw this as a kid, I've always thought that this is where he's, actually back from the dead. He comes out of the morgue, and look, people have debated this since 1984, and they say you can see his breath when he's first pushed into the cold locker. And if anything, there's no way you can't argue he's not at least supernatural at this point. I've kind of always gone with dead. I know he doesn't become full-blown Jason Zombie until 6, which I love that part of it. I mean, I'm always going to like the rotted corpse Jason. But yeah, Ted White's always been my favorite. I think a second to that is Richard Brooker, who was right before him, who was just a lumbering, hulking mass. In Part 5, you mentioning the direction being Tommy is the killer, or he kills Pam, and then they switch directions. Again, the end of Part 5, when he does that, that's the dream sequence. That doesn't really happen. It is a dream sequence, so you could easily jump from that to Part 6. Him escaping and seeking out to kill Jason. I mean, technically you could always say that Tommy's biggest inspiration to be hunting Jason could fall back to Rob. He's killing me, Rob. He's killing me is definitely a topic for another time. And if you know, you know. Always great to hear from you, Horror Chat Matt, and we look forward to hearing from you again next week.
You are listening to Doc Mark's Macabre Cast, episode 152, Favorite Final Girl of the Friday the 13th franchise.
So, some may remember and some may not, but a while back I had a topic that asked if you could change one thing in a horror film that you feel would make it better than it already is. What would that be? Well, I'd like to propose a change to the iconic Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D. But before I do that, let's discuss Chris, the final girl from Part 3, and why, in my opinion, she is far from the top final girl of the franchise. Not by any sake of the means a bad character. No, she's a great character. So let's examine that, shall we? At some point before the timeline begins in Part 2, Chris suffered a major trauma at her parents' cabin, Higgins Haven. After a squabble with her parents, she darted into the woods and was attacked by Jason. Even though the creators decided not to divulge the details, she was sexually assaulted by Jason, but blacked out before the incident occurred and woke up in her bed. Something she understandably never got over. So now, after the events of Part 2, which is like the next day or so, she returns with her friends to the cabin for the first time, even though the killer that is stalking them is a hulking, bald mass of a man. She never really puts it together that he is her attacker from before until he removes the hockey mask. The events of Part 3 and her fight to the finish with Jason have triggered her trauma to the max. And again, understandably so. In fact, seeing her behavior in the very end leads one to think she's on her way to the mental asylum. Now, I wouldn't change a thing about Chris's character. I just wouldn't have made her the final girl. I'd let the character live and still see her go off to the happy home. But for a moment, let's entertain a secondary character in this chapter, Vera. She comes from what little bit that we see, a strict Spanish family. We are let in on it later at the market that her family is on food stamps. So in some ways, it suggests her life hasn't been as easy or as pleasant as some of the others. Also suggesting that her skin is perhaps a little thicker. I think they should have set Vera up to be the dark horse. And while the audience focuses on Chris, and all hell finally comes down on everyone, Vera could have stepped up and been the final girl, and been the reason Chris survives. But that's not what Hollywood chose to do. And if anything, she probably has one of the best death scenes in the film. So there's that.
Grim Facts.
Hi, Macabre Theater. Hi, Dark Mark. Hi, Monster Kids. How are ya? Grim Kim checking in. Nice and early this week, Mark, because I'm driving home. And you guys, I watched the most awesome movie on Tubi last night. I know. I can't even believe I'm saying that. First of all, Mark, I'm sorry I can't contribute to who's my favorite final girl, because I really only remember, I think, from the first and maybe like the third. She was good, the third. But I do want to say, if you guys haven't seen the movie Final Girl with Abigail Breslin, oh, that's fun. It's a fun movie. In a morbid, macabre way, of course. But I definitely recommend that movie, Final Girl. It's probably from about 5-6 years ago. Okay, so the movie, it's been on my list, an infamous list of movies that I get off of other infamous lists of movies to see and you shouldn't miss, and, underrated horror. Okay, it's called My Mother's Eyes. Wow! It was awesome. It was shot in black and white, very evocative, and I love it. All the different tones of black and white going on, and it was subtitled, but it was very, very. You know what? I don't even think the whole thing was subtitled. Maybe it's some English and some subtitles. It was very easy to follow. There's not a hell of a lot of dialogue to it, and the story is just this young girl witnesses this traumatic event in her household, and it sets her on a trajectory of, wow, you don't know where it's going. And I'm not going to say it's a slow burn, because it's not. The storyline progresses at a very even clip right from the beginning. But I will say it's a quiet movie, maybe understated. I'm not going to say subtle, because it's not subtle. But when you watch it, you may know what I mean by that. And highest recommendation. It was just awesome. And it's renewing my faith in streaming services, because it's hit or miss, and I've had a lot of misses lately. So anyway, just wanted to throw that down there, because it's just one of the best things I've seen in a long, long while. The other one I mention a lot, I don't know what's making me think of this. I think it was shot in black and white as well. Underrated vampire movie called A Girl Walks Home at Midnight. It's set over in, well, not here. I don't want to say Egypt, but Pakistan maybe. And I just remember that I just really, really enjoyed that, and it exceeded my expectations of what I wanted from that movie. And I would say this one too. And I'm not really going to tell you more about the plot, because I just found it fascinating that I did not read any synopses beforehand or know where the plot was going to go. And I'm so glad I didn't. And anyway, check in with me if you watched it, and I would love to banter with you about it. And that's it. I'm just going to say goodbye for now, and I hope you guys are doing okay. Talk to you later. Bye.
A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night from 2014. Joe Bob Briggs showed that on the last drive-in. And yes, it's an Iranian film, actually, and it was excellent. Definitely a must-see. I remember when my mother's eyes got all kinds of talk and reviews, and I remember wanting to see it. And just like a lot of things, it just kind of falls out of my consciousness. When it comes and goes, sometimes I just forget things. I need to write them down, like you do. And I know you've seen more than 3 Friday the 13th films. You had to have seen past 1 through 3. And if you haven't seen part 4, that's a sacrilege. And you may have to have your Monster card taken away from you. If you haven't seen part 4, The Final Friday, even when it came out, grim. I don't know if I'm believing this. I'm quite sure that you saw it. And funny how when you mentioned favorite final girl, you kind of guessed Chris right after I did a whole reason why she wouldn't make a good final girl and who should have been the final girl. Just kind of ironic. Always great to hear from you, Grim Kim, and we hope to hear from you again next week.
And now it's time for Real World Horror. And now here's your host, Dark Mark.
June 23rd, 1965. Marvin Martin called the Houston, Texas police for a welfare check on his aunt and uncle, Fred and Edwina Rogers. It had been several days since he had heard from the couple, and he was worried. Officers forced their way into the home, finding it empty. They noticed, however, food had been left out in the kitchen. When one of the patrolmen opened the refrigerator, he made the grisly discovery of the dismembered bodies of Fred and Edwina. The adult son, Charles, who also lived in the house, became the immediate, obvious person of interest. Despite efforts to clean up the ghastly scene, blood evidence was found leading right to Charles's bedroom. To this day, Charles has never been located and was declared legally dead in 1975, leaving this ghoulish case officially unsolved.
Tune in next time to Real World Horror with Dark Mark.
You are listening to Dark Mark's Macabre Cast, episode 152, Favorite Final Girl of the Friday the 13th franchise.
Way cool. It's Chicago Tina.
Hey, Dark Mark and Karis, the little mummy. Just calling for a really quick second here because I have a confession to make. I've only seen 2 Friday the 13th movies, the first one and the second one. So I really don't have much to say about today's subject. But I like the movies. I just never got around to seeing anything past the second one. Same with Halloween. I seen the first one and the second one, and I didn't like the second Halloween at all, but I like the Friday the 13th Part 2 better than Halloween Part 2, so I don't know. So I like the final girls in those 2 movies. How's that? Anyway, I have something I wanted to ask you. If you heard that the doll Annabelle is going to be taking up permanent residence in Salem, and if you plan on going to see it sometime. There's so many cool things coming up in Salem, this year, this season. It's going to be awesome. We've got to get together and do another, we should have another horror night at the Salem Cinema. Maybe grab something to eat and hang out there, have another hangout for the Monster Kids. That was a really good time last time. And they have good popcorn at the Salem Cinema. So, yeah, I'll be talking to you soon. I can't wait to hear what the subject is for next week, and I'll give you a longer message. Sorry. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Chicago Tina, what you're telling me is that within the last 40 some odd years, you have never seen past Friday the 13th Part 2. I find this hard to swallow and believe. But that just tells me you obviously do not like Friday the 13th movies. That's the impression I get, because these suckers were on USA Network in the 90s constantly. TNT constantly. I just don't know how you never saw past Part 2 and hate Halloween 2. That's my Halloween. I love Halloween 2 was the first I saw in the theater. I had mentioned before my dad took me. And quite honestly, he's a tour de force. Michael Myers is a tour de force in Halloween 2. I kind of like it better. Always have. Maybe it's because I'm biased and saw it in the theater. And as a kid at that age, found it very scary. Annabelle coming to Salem? Well, where else should her final resting place be? Of course, Salem. And I think another Macabre meetup is definitely in order. I loved the Salem cinema. Seeing the original Friday the 13th on there in a packed theater was a hoot. And I'm going to have to look into what is coming. And absolutely, another Macabre meetup is in line. Hopefully it won't be the one like for Jaws, where no one came. Well, it was just me, Laura Horror, and Jack-o'-lantern. And we still had a great time, but yeah, it was a downer that no one came. Always great to hear from you, Chicago Tina, and we hope to hear from you again real soon.
Is this something you could share with the rest of us, Amazing Larry?
Greetings, Dark Mark and Karis, a little mummy. Scary Larry here. Say, Karis, now, don't get too wrapped up in my mummy jokes. See what I did there? So, I'm biased because I had a fun time meeting Amy Steele, and will say she's my favorite final girl from the Friday the 13th franchise, since she had a great attitude and tried lopping my head off. I saw a still of Joe Spinell and thought it was from his horror film Maniac. Then in the comments, it referenced a movie called The Last Horror Film, I never heard of, and it also goes by Fanatic. It's basically a horror spoof. He re-teams with horror icon Carolyn Monroe, who starred with him in Maniac. He plays Vinny, a New York City cabbie who is obsessed with her character Jenna Bates, a film star showcasing her new horror film, Scream, at the Cannes Film Festival. Side note, I thought it was hilarious that in this movie they showed billboards depicting two movies, Scream and Stab. Now, Vinny goes to France to convince her to star in his film, which is basically just in his own mind. He stops at nothing and won't let anyone getting in his way. This is self-deprecation at its finest. Spinell, who is known for his brutish characters, plays a humorous caricature of his maniac persona. And the movie basically mocks the whole movie and awards industry. It's free on Prime, and while not nearly as good as Maniac, it's a decent dark-humored horror film. Gratuitous from start to finish.
Yes, you had mentioned to me before, Scary, that you had the privilege of meeting Amy Steele, Jenny. Yeah, that must have been great.
That must have been a comfortable picture. Larry shows up dressed like a maniac. Hey, take a picture with me. Not awkward at all.
In the last horror film, I do agree Maniac is a better film. And the last horror film reminds me of a very dark version of King of Comedy with Robert De Niro. And if you've never seen that, you got to check that out. Always great to hear from you, Scary. Thank you for seeing it so we don't have to.
You are listening to Doc Mark's Macabre Cast, episode 152, Favorite Final Girl of the Friday the 13th franchise.
Cobwebbed Classics. Welcome to Cobwebbed Classics, where I dust off a lost, forgotten, or just plain unappreciated film and introduce it to, or maybe just remind you about it so your spooky Saturday night might run a little creepier. This week's Cobwebbed classic is 1975's Shivers, directed and written by David Cronenberg, starring Paul Hampton, Joe Silver, and Barbara Steele. Just outside Montreal sits Starliner Towers, a modern, well, for 1975 anyway, high-rise apartment complex, where its manager welcomes prospective tenants. Inside one of the apartments, Dr. Emil Hobbs is attacking and stripping what looks like a 12-year-old girl. This was so unnerving to say the least, as I kept reminding myself that the actress has to be at least 18 to be showing that much flesh. Not only is she of age, by the way, but film censors most likely felt compelled to reveal the girl's age in the dialogue to relieve viewers. It may have helped, though, had they not dressed her like a 12-year-old. But I digress. Onward and upward. So eventually Dr. Hobbs strangles her to death and slices open her stomach, and he pours acid in there. Then he slits his own throat. I'm sure by this point there are those of you monster kids who would have already opted out of seeing this film. And I understand. But as soon as we jump over to the other apartment, where a man stands in front of his bathroom mirror, pushing on and probing his stomach, obviously something is inside people living in these glorified residential flats. Cronenberg sets us up with a long-winded scientific plot revolving around experiments using parasites injected into the human body to take over the function of an organ. I guess this isn't a case where said organ is infected or diseased. Anyway.
Dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if...
Dr. Hobbs was crazy because the parasites were a combination of aphrodisiac and venereal disease, and his plan was to turn the world into a mindless orgy. I guess when these things get into you, you become overstimulated and sex-starved and violent. The parasites are spread through sexual contact, or if they somehow exit your body via vomit and the like, you see these disgusting little slugs that one way or another will find an orifice on your body and enter. And like poor Barbara Steele's character taking a relaxing bath in this picture, I don't think I need to elaborate that scene any further. The more who get infected, the more it spreads. Not the best Cronenberg film by far, but a fun little gross-out venture nonetheless. This was, in fairness, David Cronenberg's first feature film, and according to him, there would be no Alien film from 1979 without Shivers. Shivers is a great title, but its original title was probably more appropriate: Orgy of the Blood Parasites. Taglines for this gem are as follows.
Going mad is just the beginning. Being terrified is just the beginning.
1975's Shivers is this week's
Cobwebbed Classics.
The following program is rated TV MALV. It contains strong language and violence. It is intended only for mature audiences.
Metal Melody.
Hello, Doc Mark, Kara's Little Mummy, and all the Macabre Cast fans listening. Metal Melody checking in for episode 152. I'd like to say that I am with Grim Kim when it comes to Tubi. I've seen a few movies on there, but nothing to recommend. They're usually just time fillers. I swear it is just not good for horror movies. Most of them I've watched are either lame or they have poor acting or sometimes both. So yeah, I am not a big Tubi fan at all. Also, as for Horror Chat Matt, I hope he finds his way out of hell and gets back to us in one piece. I hope he's not lost down there, just circling around and around and around. Anyway, I haven't seen many movies lately because I've been very busy with work and life in general. But I did watch one that I thought was pretty okay. It's from 2017 and it's called Against the Night. And it's where a bunch of friends sneak into an abandoned prison to make a ghost hunting video, but they start disappearing one by one. It wasn't a bad watch. I thought it was pretty good. So just throwing that out there. Not much at the theater lately either, but I do want to say that I cannot wait to see Lee Cronin's The Mummy. It comes out this weekend on the 17th, and I can't wait to see it. The trailer for it looks very good, and I will give a review on episode 153. As for this episode's topic, which final girl from Friday the 13th is my favorite, I would probably have to go with Alice because I thought that she was brave and I thought she was tough when she needed to be. And the killing of Miss Voorhees was the best and kicked ass. So yeah, I'd say she's my favorite. Just for a side note, I'd probably say my least liked final girl would have been Pam. I think she was only really good for screaming and falling down. But that's my opinion and you asked for it. Well, anyway, that's all for now until episode 153. I hope everybody has had a wonderful Easter, and I hope you have a fantastic week ahead. I know that I, for one, will definitely be enjoying the spring weather. Finally. Everybody take care. Bye-bye.
Melody's really cleaned up her act. I mean, she comes on here and she hardly even swears anymore. Maybe it's time to take the swear jar away. Maybe someone else will earn it.
Yes, Lee Cronin's The Mummy looks very scary. I am excited to see that, but try not to get my hopes up too much because sometimes every time they start to reinvent the Universal monsters, I'm disappointed. Not every time, but sometimes. And favorite being Alice, well, you go with what worked. She was one of the first. You can't beat Alice. But I have a question for you about Alice. If you remember in the film, she's seeing that older camp counselor leader, Steve, and she says to him, I may have to go back to California to straighten something out. You think that's just a made-up thing because she's just not interested in the guy and needs an excuse to leave, or does Alice really have something to straighten out? I guess we'll never know. And I'm kind of surprised that your least liked is Pam. You sure you're saying the same name? Because she kind of came at fake Jason with a chainsaw in that one and did a good job protecting Reggie. So I'm wondering if you have the wrong name. But either way, to each his own. Thank you so much, Metal Melody, and we hope to hear from you again real soon.
Goditi questo episodio de Cast Macabro.
Thank you, Maria Monstalia, for telling our Italian friends to enjoy this episode of Macabre Cast.
Shh, come on now, everybody pipe down. It's time for the final thought. When a guy who watches monster movies is all of a sudden going to talk like some kind of philosopher.
Let's ask ourselves a question, shall we? Are horror movies really not scary anymore because they just don't make them like they used to? Or are we remembering fear we experienced as a child and we are now older and wiser? Well, some of us. Overstimulated, desensitized, a tolerance level that's through the roof. Kind of why I'm wondering how remaking Faces of Death, Hollywood thought they were going to capture that magic. Now, I haven't seen it. But the more Hollywood continues to recycle things, we're never going to get that next Exorcist, Chainsaw Massacre, or Friday the 13th. But we can hope. Beware the moon. Keep clear of the moors. But most of all, remember, be good to yourself. This is Dark Mark, signing off. See you soon, I hope. This is a Macabre Theater production.
Subscribe us.